Not one. I find something to be grateful for every single day. Sometimes they allow me to touch something soft. Sometimes the voices are quiet for more than 5 minutes. And once, I'm pretty sure I saw the sun. Yeah, right? Yeah. Hmm. Oh no, what did you do?
I'm sorry, guys. You only heard one half of my diatribe. Uh, Welcome to the Sunday Superversive Livestream, and so on and so forth. You heard Anthony's half. That's all that matters.
Oh,
Uh,
good. I was worried.
yeah. So today we're discussing the Antioch Declaration. Every now and then, what happens is that you have a non God inspired attempt at a religious movement within Christianity. Now, this isn't as far as a heresy. I want to be very clear on that. Like, there are things that are wrong, but I wouldn't call it what like Catharism is, if you get me, or Arianism, right? This is more akin to somebody having what they think is a good idea, and they should have kept it to themselves. Uh, I'll read the. I'm sure Catholics have this sort of thing happen all the time. Can you attest to that or no?
So you're thinking something like the Antioch Declaration?
Sure, but like weirdo theologians who try to make hay out of something that really just isn't a thing.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of things on this on this kind of track, like, and some of it gets rather extreme, and some of it you have people wondering, like, why doesn't the hierarchy shut them up?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, like, the obvious example here, let's not beat around the bush here. It's like James Martin, right?
yeah.
Uh, Father James Martin, who is a clear heretic. He has that Jesuitical way of speaking, and in the most negative way that I could use that. I don't think Jesuits actually inherently negative, by the way,
Mm.
but he has a Jesuitical way of speaking, which is he
Double
will
tongued.
technically, if you question him, he can sort of make it slip into something that's not like openly heretical, but like you all know what he means.
He's
You
tap
know,
dancing on that line pretty hard. Uh,
yeah, and very intentionally. Yeah.
mm.
Uh,
And so,
he's a good example, that
mm,
sort of ideology. There are others, like
yeah.
Amy Comey Barrett is actually a good example of that. So the Supreme Court Justice,
Mm.
who is famously a Catholic. Josiah, who is the artist formerly known as Thursday, Matt's Gen Z assistant on Pines with Aquinas. Uh, he, he talked about this a bit, where he was saying that he was discussing how Kamala Harris hated Catholics, which is true. She absolutely does. Uh, she was horribly bigoted. She hates Christians too, but she,
Yeah.
like all Christians, but
It's
she had singled out Catholics in a couple ways. Anyway,
it's
she
easier
he
to
meant
fight Catholics because they're one organization. Where it's like, congratulations, you hate on Baptists. So which churches do you particularly hate?
yeah,
What do
right,
you
like
mean, which churches? There's a
the
lot.
Westboro Baptist Church, obviously, which is
Yes.
everybody's whipping boy, and it's made up of 6 people in the same family, as if like it has any cultural relevance at all. It has like none.
Yes.
Uh, and
They're
everybody
another
acts
good
like
example of what I'm talking about, by the way.
they're probably the most extreme version of it, but it's also
Mm,
like 6 people.
yeah.
But what I'm thinking of is like Amy Comey Barrett. She's Catholic. She's Catholic. She's
Mm-hmm.
part of an organization that's called like the Handmaids or something. And I am, to be clear here, I haven't looked this up at all. I'm going off of what Josiah was saying on the show with Matt Frad. And he claimed that the organization itself actually had a lot of issues that was like kind of indifferentist, like that the organization was like all religions can find a way to God. Now this is a heresy, right? Uh, yes, I know Pope Francis just said it. He was also wrong. Uh, like but this is a heresy to be part of an organization that believes this. It's espousing a heresy, but she's in the church, so I don't even know if Josiah is right because I haven't looked into the organization. But if he is right, that would be a good example, I think.
Yes. Uh, Sorry, I was just finishing a comment. Um, yeah, that's a pretty good example. Like these are people who, again, may not be entirely heretical in the sense of actual doctrine, but they certainly have issues in their own heart. And this one, the Antioch Declaration, um, I like you have to understand like how little I care about these things. Like there's always another like I viewed Christian nationalism kind of like this at first too, where it's like there's always somebody with some new idea who thinks that well because my edition of the Bible and it's like a one derived from the Message or something says such and such verses in a certain way, it means blah blah blah. Get a King James or whatever the Pope uses. Otherwise, shut up. Um, it's like there's these ideas that float around like we have to fight this, we have to be like this. They keep Christ in there and they keep salvation, but they may not necessarily be right on literally anything else. And even then, quite frankly, when you're that far down, you're very questionable. In this case, I'm going to read out the introduction real quick. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch, Acts 11:26. I don't know what CSB stands for, by the way. Um, just as the apostle Paul at Antioch opposed him, Peter, to his face because he stood condemned. I think that was over the Judaizers, by the way. Galatians 2:11, CSB, for compromising the gospel of Jesus Christ by subjecting it to racial barriers. So this brief state, which isn't true, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute. There's a lot of things that are just wrong from the basis. So this brief statement opposes the ideas of some contemporary leaders and influencers seeking to introduce anti-gospel racial categories into the church. Just so at this period, just so you know, Peter's issue was not explicitly racial. His problem was that he favored the Judaizers, which tried to make salvation as much of a work as the old religion of the Jews were, rather than the new gift of salvation through Jesus Christ. And what would happen is that he would put a burden too much to bear for the Gentiles, for example, circumcision or certain food dietary restrictions, that they couldn't bear. You're not a Christian if you don't act like the Jews. That's what he was saying. Followed the old Jewish religious things. And by the way, I'm just summarizing it here. It's a bit more subtle than this, but this is good enough to go on. So it wasn't really about the racial issue. It was about what religious ordinances were required for salvation. I will continue. This Antioch declaration was not conceived or developed in haste. I disagree. I think it was very much in haste in a way. But after much prayer, thought, counsel, and soul searching. Our task is an unpleasant one, but like the Apostle Paul's, it is necessary, even when other Christians are involved. When the gospel once for all delivered to the saints is itself at stake, we dare not remain silent. Thus, as confessionally Reformed, Lutheran, and evangelical believers from a broad range of churches, resist a rising tide of reactionary thinking from the fringes of our own circles. Led us, the risk are led astray by wolves clothed as shepherds among the younger generations of Christian men whom we love and care about deeply. As believers, we must always build and act upon the foundation of Scripture. This must include all our engagement in the socio-cultural, and political life. To react to cultural developments in a manner that denies the functional and final authority of the Word of God over us is to move against the rule of Christ and His kingdom. Since God does not show favoritism, Romans 2:11, the Word of God must be faithfully applied everywhere and to all. By the way, Romans 2:11 literally just says NIV, for God does not show favoritism. That's funny. Sorry, hold on. I'm going to look up the context of this thing. 2:11. But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For there is no partiality with God. This is NKJV. For as many as sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. Mm. I don't know about that verse 10.
Look in Romans 2:11. You said.
Yeah, but start at verse 10, and then so
All
for a
right.
little
So
context.
my translation, I have, as I just mentioned to you before we showed, I have my Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, uh, which is a doorstopper of a book, and I love it. Uh, so this is the RSCVE, which is the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. I don't think Catholic Edition means that much, except for the fact that it adds the deuterocanonical books. So
Yeah.
make of that what you will. But yeah, I think it's the same. There's a Revised Standard Version standard as well. I think it's pretty much the same as that. But honoring, there will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first, and also the Greek. But honor, glory, and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first, and also the Greek. For God shows no partiality. All who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. Okay, so hold on here.
So what I'm saying with the point is that
Okay.
they. What's up?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to grasp the context of what's being said here.
Mm.
They actually have a note under here, under no partiality. This is what my study Bible says. The Jews can expect no favoritism over the Gentiles on the day God judges the world. It matters only that people repent of evil in time to live for God instead of themselves and their shallow ambitions. So, basically, the note that I wanted to make is that it seems that the emphasis here is not on the fact that Jews are no worse than anyone else, but rather Paul emphasizing that Jews aren't going to get out of the judgment that everybody else is also under.
Yep,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Like, he's who Paul is addressing here. He's addressing the Jews. Romans, I've always found, has some moments
Yeah, it's
in
to
it
the.
that are very moving.
Yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, like the moments in Romans when Paul is addressing his people, and he says things like basically like, "I would rather be damned than have to like tell you this," but it gives me no pleasure, right? Like,
Hmm.
but I need to be honest with you all. You're all screwed. Uh, like, I paraphrase, and
Yes.
of course it's not what he says. He says you got to get in line, which is not quite the same thing.
Yes.
Uh,
Which,
but
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
as we go through this, you'll actually see that they themselves show some favoritism, which is to be expected from their kind.
Yeah, I'll let you give your thoughts on. I'll tell you like the things that stood out to me but I'll let you go first.
Let
So
me
keep going.
finish the introduction. This
Sure.
clearly implies that while we must never criticize the political right simply because the progressive left demand it, to declare that we will never have enemies on the right simply indicates to Satan and his hordes what his next attack on the people of God should take, and from which direction it should come, in order to avoid a diabolic ditch on both sides. By the way, it's pretty much inevitable that something like this will happen, because it does happen like that. And to advance God's kingdom purposes, we therefore offering the follow declarations and invite signatories. Augustine, the City of God, 1846. By the evidence of their own scriptures, they bear witness for us that have not fabricated the prophecies about Christ. It follows that when the Jews do not believe in our scriptures, their scriptures are fulfilled in them, while they read them with blind eyes. It is in order to give this testimony which, in spite of themselves, they supply for our benefit by their possession and preservation of those books of the Old Testament, that they are themselves dispersed among all nations, whether the Christian church spreads. Hence the prophecy in the book of Psalms, slay them not, lest they forget your law, scatter them by your might. So, this is going to sound weird. This might sound weird to anyone who actually cares about this, but I have no idea why this Augustine quote is there. Um, this is just the first, this is like, there's, yeah, I don't really understand how this thing connects to it. Except to maybe say something about the Jews, which, if people maybe are an Augustine scholar, they'd have a bit more to say about it, to handle it. But quite frankly, it just sits there. They're not really talking about the Jews in the previous statements, but then they have a statement about the Jewish diaspora across the world by Hadrian. It doesn't really work. So I'm going to ignore it with as much thought as they did to put it in. Uh, they have these declarations here. There's quite a few of them, and we're not going to do all of them, but we are going to uh, cover some of them. So the first one, though, is again more nonsense. We deny that the kingdom purposes of Christ and we deny that the kingdom purposes of Christ and requirements of his word can be equated with the seating positions of political actors during the French Revolution, or that the modern antithesis between right and left is equivalent to the antithesis that God established in the Garden of Eden between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, the kingdom of darkness and kingdom of light. Now, if I were writing this, I'd say that we deny that the modern politics of America and of all time cannot be perfectly equated to God's will, to good and evil, which is what they're saying here. But this sentence, which and it's one sentence, 4 lines in a bit. Uh, this sentence doesn't do anything for anybody who isn't one versed in the French Revolution, understands what he means by the Garden of Eden, and doesn't think that, like, there's there's rhetorical tricks that somebody can use to convince you to be on your side. They want to heighten your emotion and cause you to make an emotional choice that will eventually change either to willingness to accept their leadership or a willingness to accept their code in the future. So, in other words, him going, well, I'm going to put all this dialectic information in there doesn't actually do anything for anybody except to slow down the mindset and create something the common man just won't be able to handle. Because in reality, we are not arguing for or against some sort of weird rich person in a leather bound study. We are arguing towards the people. When Anthony and I do our Protestant versus Catholic thing, we are talking to each other, sure. We are reacting to each other, we're paying attention to what each other says. However, our real statement of the real people we are trying to, provide information to are our listeners. Even though it's not a classic debate, We're, it's like walking into one lecture and then walking into another lecture.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't come out of these with a better knowledge of how both the fundamental Protestant position is, for my case, and the Catholic position is for Anthony's case, we have failed. And to better communicate, we use rhetorical tricks, tell funny stories, uh, uh, use biblical scripture, keep the argument simple, put a few zingers in. We try to do that. We don't, like, while we do this, later on, when people are more acclimated to it, we don't start with um what's a good one? If I start with I deny the immaculate conception because of, and then I lay out like some sort of basically a genetic argument as to why Mary must necessarily have a sin nature, and then he lays out, and it takes like 15 minutes to get through. Like, that's not good for anybody. Like, if I have to take 15 minutes to make a point, that's a bad speech. And the same with Anthony. I believe that
Mm-hmm.
Mary has an immaculate nature because of, and then you mentioned some esoteric logic of how Jesus needs to be born from a sinless woman to be truly sinless, and then you take also 15 minutes to make your point. It's bad stuff. It's confusing. While things like the French Revolution are eternally relevant while we have sort of a liberal world order, the fact is that one, people don't actually understand where the positions are, and I want to be gentle, but I want to be very clear. The Catholic Church's representatives in that area, maybe not the Catholic Church itself, but certainly the representatives of that area, worked with the revolutionaries. It was only places like the Vendée that rebelled against them, but Paris was fully taken. What does that mean now? Am I supposed to, if I know that and I read it as written, what does that mean? The third estate, or the second estate, excuse me. You know, were they sitting on the right? Was the second estate sitting on the right or left? I don't know. Does he know? Do the people who study this know? They don't. So the thing is that this isn't even funny. It's just bad. Do you have any thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah. So basically, the simpler way I think of making the point that you're trying to make is that this is a badly presented statement, which
Yeah.
I did a bit of research to see like what people were saying about it, and that seemed to be the general consensus is that it's just kind of confusing. It's not very good.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, which, yeah, I would agree. Interestingly, James White. Oh wow, I did not know that. Douglas Wilson and James White and Jeff Durbin. Those are three very big names in the on like Protestant YouTube at least.
Sure.
James White has been around since the '90s doing debates with Catholics.
Hmm.
Jeff Durbin is like has described himself as a disciple of White. Douglas Wilson is well known for he wrote some books that went viral in the manosphere. That I remember Dalrock back in the heyday of it
Yeah.
was responding to him, and he didn't really agree with his points. I don't know a whole lot. I know the least about Wilson. I just know that he actually is very popular. White, I am very familiar with, and Durbin, I'm familiar with because he was like again, he was kind of a disciple of White, you know.
Yeah.
So I am surprised to see their names on here
You,
uh,
you would be
as
shocked.
collaborators.
You'd be shocked how easy it is. One, either to fake it, or two, to sign and forget. Um,
Yeah, but he's mentioned as a collaborator.
oh, as a
So
collaborator, yeah, that
yeah,
doesn't surprise
they're Durbin, White, and Wilson are collaborators. They helped to make it,
me.
uh, which is very
Let's see.
interesting. But yeah, my main point with it is like I agree with you. The problem here is honestly that it uses big language and is not very clear.
Yep.
It lacks clarity. And there are large parts of this I would say that are basically correct,
Yeah.
right? Like
Like,
they're fine
well,
anyway, though kind of pointless.
like I said earlier, this isn't like pure heresy. It's just dumb and overwritten. and these things come out every now and then. I remember some things coming out when I was a child, and it was like, this is the big new thing, and my dad laughed it off, and I laughed it off, because it's like, this isn't going to go anywhere. It's sound and fury signifying nothing, as the saying goes. Uh, you good on point one?
Yeah, I'm looking again at point. Yeah, point again. Like it's just kind of weird. Point one, right? Like
Yeah,
what they're saying, they're bringing up the French Revolutions. Like, what, dude? What are you talking about? Nobody is equating anything with the French Revolution.
yeah,
I mean, like the best I could think of is they're trying to make a historical point that the left-right divide dates to the left-right distinction made in the French Revolution, which is a claim I have heard people make, but is also like so far removed from the modern left-right divide in the United
mm-hmm,
States, certainly, and most of these people are Americans. Uh, at least White, Durbin, and Wilson are American, so I assume that the rest are probably mostly American. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, like the it's so far removed from the modern left-right divide that like most people are gonna read that and go, "Okay, thank you." Like
thank you.
the Trice requirements of this word are not with the position of political actors during the French Revolution. Like, yeah, dude. No, was someone saying that?
Right.
Like, if what you're trying to say is the modern American conception of conservatism is not equivalent with God, the kingdom of God, then just say that. Like,
Yep.
what why would you say something else? I don't know.
It's
My
difficult
bigger
because
issues,
it. Sorry,
yeah.
keep going.
Sorry, my bigger issues come later. Is all I was gonna say. So
Yeah.
keep going.
So it's like one of these things where like it's over intellectualized, it's overthought, and at certain points, it's just weird. Hello, Megabuster Shepherd, and hello, Eldritch Fan. By the way, he says he did check out audio of all the wrong questions. Lemony Snicket started out pure alpha. He was a leader in a ladies' man, but got humbled in adulthood. I don't know. I don't want to talk about it right now. I just thought you should know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm reading it. He was a. I don't agree. Okay. Well, let's keep going.
Yep, yep. So the second point is we affirm that the modern neo-pagan secular project is bankrupt. I don't know what the neo-pagan secular project is. This is the first time I've heard it, and desperately trying to hold the social order together by means of a fraudulent narrative and anti-Christian worldview. As a result, the lives of the secular elites in all spheres have necessarily grown increasingly evident and outrageous. So, Anthony, you know how this reads to me? Is that the neo pagan LARPers they believe that the neo pagan LARPers have power and uh, actually control things. The dude with the Marvel Thor
Yeah.
statue in his God closet, uh, he's he's a threat.
Yeah.
He's controlling things in Washington. He prayed to Zeus the Thunderbringer, and there was that's what caused the storm in North Carolina. Don't you know? It was Poseidon and Zeus. He made the right sacrifices. Didn't actually get his hands dirty or kill a cow and burn it before an altar in a sacred place like an oak tree where a man was hanged. But don't you know, Anthony? The neo-pagan secular project is bankrupt. Uh,
Mm.
no, this is a dumb one. This is just pure stupidity. This is going to sound weird, but even though the elites do not worship God, they hate God, they hate Christians. It's just hatred all the way down. Even though they hate God, they're not pagan. Some of those cats actually think that they're like Catholic or Protestant or evangelical of some kind. Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden believe that they're Catholic and they support abortion to the hilt. Do are they Catholic? Not in any way, any true way. Just because they cross that threshold does not bring salvation. So those people certainly aren't pagan, even though they're maybe unsaved. What about people who are uh, maybe not necessarily Christian? Well, they're not going to call a Jewish person a pagan. That's not what they do. That's not what they're going to talk about. Or if something like, um, there's some Muslims in there, but Muslims are better described as a Christian heresy or even a Jewish heresy, depending on how you look at them. Then they are an actual pagan society. Certain parts of them are certainly pagan, and they're more pagan than other things, but it's like there's not enough Muslims in power to matter in our nation. So who's the neo-pagan secular project? Are they talking about the Bohemian Grove, the worship of Moloch? Well, that's not paganism, that's just demon worship. And of course, we're not just talking about yeah, we basically affirm that the ancient gods were demons, but it's you
I
know
mean, I guess it makes some sense if they're talking about Bohemian Grove, but the modern neo-pagan secular. So yeah, the modern neo-pagan secular project. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't call the secular project neo me. I mean, maybe neo-pagan because I'm thinking like, what does that actually mean?
what
But
does it mean?
once again, I think the bigger problem here is how much unpacking we have to do of the statement to make sense of it.
Yes.
Like, is the modern secular project neo-pagan? Um, as I think it over, I think you can maybe make that argument because I've heard it called literally the new paganism, which is what neo-pagan means. And
Yeah.
the distinction of the new paganism from the old paganism is that the old paganism did not have Christ, and the new paganism had it and actively rejected him, which actually makes it worse.
Yes.
We can't go back. This is C.S. Lewis in a famous poem. That the cliche comes out of its cupboard or something, or the cliche comes out of its hole, something like that. He wrote a famous poem where he discussed like, oh, we're going back to paganism, splendid, and then it's like, so we're back to war and bloodshed and sacrificing of animals upon the altars, and honor is paramount. It's like that's what you mean, right? Uh,
no, we want to have abortions.
Right, exactly. Like that's Lewis's point is that
Yes.
it's not really like the old paganism in any meaningful way, but so I guess I could see that like I could see the argument that there might be some sort of neo-pagan element to it in the sense of like the new paganism that I'm talking about. But again, this just takes so much unpacking and there's no explanation of what they mean by this.
Yes.
That's like a wild thing to drop and just be like, yeah, you all know what we mean, right? The neo-pagans, right?
The
The
neo-pagans.
neo-pagan secular elites. You all get it. Let's just move on.
Right. So like they worship Zeus, right? No. Anyway, I put that stutter in there. Maybe he wouldn't stutter. We affirm that as a consequence, some young men have become jaded and cynical, with an element among them now rejecting and doubting the received amount of virtually anything. Hold on.
Mm,
We affirm that as a consequence, some young men in the West have become jaded and cynical. I mean that one's fair. I'm gonna give them that one.
yeah,
With an element among them now rejecting or doubting the received account of virtually. Okay, yeah, yeah. Like if it's all lies, why believe anything? But the problem is it's all lies. The greater danger
yeah.
is
No, I get what they're. I get the point, though. I mean, I suppose that's true.
yeah. The great
I
danger
don't really know what it has to do, though, with the Antioch Declaration.
or the neo
However, which
pagan.
right, which seems to be making a point about Jews, which we haven't gotten to yet, and
Yeah.
that's where I think the biggest issues come in because we so let me try and preface everything that we're going to say later with like some clarifications because I am neither I'm not one of those people who is obsessed with the Jews and goes Jews to everything. For example, as much as I like the channel Leather Apron Club, I disagree with his conclusions that you know the that the our stance towards Israel is so important that it overrides every other consideration when voting, which was literally his argument as to
Mm,
why we should not be voting in this election. That
yes.
Trump shared a sentiment towards Israel that was overly uh, conciliatory, over that was too pro-Israel, and thus that was such an important issue essentially, or it was such an overriding issue. It meant that nothing else that he claimed he would do would actually mattered,
Yeah.
right? Like literally, I'm trying to not be unfair. I'm trying to state the argument a fair way, but I don't really know. And if he ever listens to the show, feel free to correct me because I like Leather Apron Club.
Yeah.
So I have no desire to make him sound bad, right? But
Right.
that seems to be the
He's
gist
done
of
good
what he was
work.
saying. He's done excellent work,
Yes.
truly superb stuff. I've recommended several of his videos on several topics in the past, but
Hmm.
uh, I don't agree with that position at all, and I'm not somebody who points to Jews as like the cause of all ills in the world. However, I think that we kind of try to be honest on the channel, right?
Hmm.
It's like this might prevent us from getting to a certain size, even if we did get bigger than we get now. But there is something to like Jews as a people, and the modern Jewish religion is different in fundamental ways and is
Mm-hmm.
important in different ways than other religions, right? Like
Yes.
it can't be treated as the same thing. And the main point, of course, is that as a religion, by necessity, they're a religion that got the same revelation that we did, but rejected its fulfillment,
Yep.
right? They had their religion fulfilled in front of them and said that they did not accept that. Now,
Yep.
that alone makes it fundamentally different than any other type of religion, and that's one of the reasons that Christians did historically always treat them more negatively. The other problem is something that when you talk about Judaism in various countries is that they don't see themselves as citizens first. They simply do not.
Yep.
They see them and they will say it themselves. People who we have talked to, who we like, I'm not going to say who, but who I like, who I think are good people, right? Who are
Yep.
even Christian, but who are Jewish, will say that they have considered moving to Israel and like living in Israel because they could get Jewish citizenship there. Which like raises the question of like in what meaningful way are you American at that point?
Yep.
Like I understand. Like, I'm not even saying that they're bad people
We're
or
not
that. I'm not
even,
even.
yeah, we're not
It's
hating
not
on
even
them
a
or
criticism,
anything like
really.
that. It's like, yeah, I mean, if there was a an American ethno state somewhere, I'd be down. That's perfectly fine. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't even have an issue with it necessarily. Like, I think though that there needs to be a point where it's like you have divided loyalties here, right? Like that need to be acknowledged. At the very least, you are here as a guest, which is the big problem too with like Jews in various countries. It's always been the issue. It's the one that Hilaire Belloc points out in his book, The Jews, when he predicts the Holocaust around like 20-ish years before it happens. Uh, and he tries to come up with a solution. He basically says that he gives three solutions. And the one that he settles on as the only moral possible solution is segregation. Because he says, like, one solution, of course, is ethnic cleansing, which is clearly evil, so we can't do that. The other solution is mass deportation, which will effectively lead to the same sort of thing as ethnic cleansing in the end, like, once you
mm-hmm.
actually do it. He goes, so we can't really do that either. Uh, the third option is, he goes, and it's the one that has historically been favored by Jews themselves, is segregation. And he goes, and he even says at the time, this is interesting because it's in the early 1900s that he says this. He's like, I understand that segregation can be somewhat of a negative word with bad connotations, but he goes, I simply mean it in the sense that they live separately. You know,
Yeah.
and a lot of the times the Jews would want that.
Yeah.
You know, I remember having people come in and talking to my class about the Holocaust and being like, yeah, there's a Venetian ghetto. It's a very nice place. I visited it. You know, like, the thing that needs to be acknowledged, though, is that they aren't, properly speaking, the people of the countries they're living in. They are
Yeah.
properly speaking Jews, right?
Yes.
And this is something even that the Bible makes clear and praises them for, right? But that needs to be critical. It's a critical point when discussing Jews and Judaism, right?
Hmm.
It needs to be understood that even in the Bible, like to them, this is a religious issue, right? Their God is, their God, right? Because it's our God too. God is commanding them to live as a people apart, right?
Yes.
That's the entire point of being Jewish, is that you are a people apart. Israel is the real homeland, and frankly, I am, as Vox Day is as well, right? Who I am all in favor of the Jews returning to Israel if they, you know, I think that would probably be the best solution, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so in that sense, I am a Zionist, right? Like,
Yeah.
which G.K. Chesterton was as well. Uh, so I am all in favor of an Israeli home state. Uh, yeah, I think this is kind of the key to all of this, though, is understanding that Jews act together, and the Jewish religion is anti-Christian in a very specific way that other religions are not. And this is not an insult to the religion. I'm not even talking about the specifics of rabbinical Judaism, right?
Hmm.
I am just talking about the logic of it. You know,
Right.
logically, it is different. Now, is it satanic in various, like, well, that's where you get to, like, okay, so probably the Jewish grandmother down the street, or the Feldmans who live right, like,
Right.
or the Feldsteins, right, who live down the street, probably no, they are almost certainly don't believe any of, like, the truly heinous stuff that you see. But when you get into things like Kabbalah, right,
Oh yeah.
you get into really weird stuff, and it is kind of a part and parcel with Judaism. There's also the fact that rabbinical Judaism itself is a really odd religion. It has historically been acknowledged by any serious scholar of religion to be a separate religion from Temple Judaism, which is the Judaism of Jesus' time, right? Essentially, Judaism split into two sects. One was Christianity, right? Like, that was the one sect of Judaism. It considered itself the fulfillment of Judaism, and it
Hmm.
opened itself up to entrance by Gentiles, and that became Christianity. And the other sect was rabbinical Judaism, which remained closed off. Now, there is nothing wrong with remaining closed off if the Messiah did not come and open up the religion, but he did. So now you have a very serious problem because you have this closed off religion that has no actual reason for existing. So its only real function anymore is to keep this group of people separated and marinating in this anti Christian religion, right? Like, it gets very odd. So this is all a prelude to what the Antioch statement's going to talk about later and what we're going to talk about, which is like, I want to be very clear about this. I don't believe in, like, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is like the document that was like, oh, Jews are actually running, everything in the world, right? Like, and they
Yes.
really control it. I also think probably there's all a lot less organized than enemies of, the Jews, like, with 10 O's, like to believe.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
because
Like
I don't think it really needs to be I don't think it needs to be organized. I think it just needs to be, you favor your own people, and that's it,
yeah.
right? Like, you don't need to sit down in a boardroom and meet to discuss this.
Right. Like the Bohemian Grove is nice and all, but it like the how do I want to put it? Like we go to church every day. Not every day. Excuse me. Every week.
Every week.
I went there today. I left there and I'm working on different things that are Christian, but then I did something that wasn't Christian, and then I'm like, I got to go back to being Christian again. Following the morals, following God's teaching, you know, got to do all that stuff. Uh, and I'm going there every week. Like these Bohemian Grove guys went there like once a year, and they're, all of a sudden, working together and perfect lockstep and in power of everything, don't you know? And it's like, yeah, sure, things probably went down with the Bohemian Grove, But fundamentally, these people were, they're not like a monolithic group. They're just a bunch of groups working together. Um, like it's like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. They backed Trump in the most recent election. But previous elections, they were Democrat, or at least they were tacitly pro-Democrat. Um, like it's like as in don't we're on the same side here, and then they switched when their stuff was no longer promoted. Um, like it's the reason why Elon Musk is no longer the darling of the left. It's because he betrayed some of their principles. So even though they've got a mob that works as like one ocean surge to one ocean surge to like overwhelm people and throw them into the surf and cancel them or whatever you want. In reality, that order came from somewhere, but that order came from like the news media section, who stopped treating him like a golden boy rather than the political section, because even though there's like lawsuits against him and stuff like that, fundamentally they haven't actually shut down his launches. Um, so there's another faction there that's promoting him. So it's like, if you're looking for a unified group, there's a Zion lobby, there's a missile lobby, there's a tech lobby, there's a media lobby, there's a sexual degeneracy lobby. All these different elite groups are working together in some ways and not working together in other ways. And that's not even all of them. That's not exhausted. So it's like, yeah, there's APAC and ADL and all these other ones, but it's like it's not the same as what someone might say on Stormer or whatever. Uh, the next one, do you have anything else to say, Anthony?
No. Do you want to skip to the good ones or go through all of them one at a time?
So I just want to go through it real quick. Basically, they're saying that even though everyone has been lied to, and the young have basically said if everything's lies, what is truth? But the thing is, he's talking to Christian young men, by the way, so it's a little weird. Um, it's just weird. Like there's no logic to that in the way you would think. One moment. And then they say that, yeah, of course, they're vulnerable to more deception. But the thing is, that doesn't quite work. And then he talks about utopian religiosism, which, doesn't quite, like, they don't get it. Like, they view liberalism as being the neo pagan utopia, but it's like, but no one ever said it was. It was just quote unquote the end of history, but not a utopia. That's very important for those who read Fukuyama. And by the way, Fukuyama is now proven wrong. He is wrong, 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 and everyone understands that. So I don't actually understand the sort of denial of the utopian thing, not in the sense of um, like they're wrong, but in the sense of that's a really weird way to say it, because all we need to do is say Francis Fukuyama was wrong, and the liberalism is dying. Uh, then they do affirm something that they should, that World War II is the um, sort of the linchpin on a lot of this stuff. Uh, they blame the triumphal hubris, but to be clear, the people who are in control didn't fight World War II. In fact, most of them fled before Germany did anything funny. So, like the Bauhaus School, which ruined architecture for 100 years now, I guess, they left. Like, there no Bauhaus people died in any camp. Uh, you know, and quite frankly, the Germans kind of like that group anyway. The high command anyway, because they were art snobs. Um, the next one is they do say that the self doubt and loathing that is sometimes put on Western powers due to certain events which we know about, the Holocaust and others, is not proper. I'll give them that. but they think that the young people aren't breaking free of it. So in other words, they're saying that, well, denying the guilt isn't the right move, because it's like a reaction to the post-war narrative rather than the narrative itself being destroyed. The thing is that that's not quite right. What's happening is that it's still a denial of any lies that may or may not have been told during the post-war period. Um, it's hard to take them at their word when they're going out of their way to both say, yes, we've been lied to our entire lives, but no, these lies are sometimes okay, and, may or may not be, those things which may or may not be lies. Um, Not that I deny the Holocaust or anything like that, but, like Eli Wiesel going, some of these things are more true in spirit than they are in reality, even though, when I was a kid and Night was Red, this was told to be a very true statement, not a
Mm-hmm.
representation. So that's what I mean when I say lies may or may not be lies. The camps existed. Somebody was shoved somewhere. Those mass graves didn't mass grave themselves. Uh, for those that had them. Um, anyway, but like what they're doing is they're trying to play a very fine line that's different from the line that I'm playing. I'm explicitly playing a line that says there were lies, there were bad things that happened, but they're none of my responsibility. Instead, they're saying that, yeah, there's no responsibility, but it's all true, but even though you were lied to a lot, which they affirm that there were lies, um, they're only a lie in service of the system, but not actually the thing itself. It's like, again, this is very weird. They want their cake, they want to eat it too, and they want to not be called any bad words over it. Um, There's a weird one that says we deny that any particular view of the Allied leaders or strategies or tactics during World War II should be a test of Christian orthodoxy. These people clearly think that the bombing of Dresden was okay. Uh, how about we deny that it's possible to harmonize Adolf Hitler and the Nazi cult with the gospel of Christ? I actually kind of find this one and the teaching of Scripture, I find this one very funny. Let's skip ahead because the rest of them are pretty nonsense to one that you want to look at. Which one do you want to look at, Anthony?
Yeah, let's see. Doo-doo-doo. I'm looking for. I'm trying to find the ones that I had.
Is it we deny that our rejection of anti Semitism requires us to ignore or minimize the destructive impact that various God hating individual Jews have had in human history? Just as our rejection.
So
Because that one's.
related to that, it's related, but I'm trying to find the specific. So they mention that there are that we affirm. This is what's weird to me. This is called the Antioch Declaration. It's a religious declaration, and they go. Also, you can't deny the Holocaust. So it says we affirm that there are, does not amount to for deliberate mass destruction of Jews, does not amount to historical certitude for what specialists call the Holocaust, and the science of history itself is called into question. I mean, I guess this is true as far as it goes. There's really no way to deny that the Holocaust itself exists.
Right.
I will also note, though, that someone like Vox Day, for example, would see that and go, yeah, I think the science of history is very suspect. Uh, so I find that kind of funny
Yep.
that they specifically go, like, it calls the science of history itself into question. Vox would go, now you're getting it. Which, and he absolutely would do that, too.
He
But,
would.
to be honest, I pretty much agree with that.
Yeah.
Like, while I do agree with you that there are, as far as I could tell, certain discrepancies in the numbers. The actual, the fact that the Holocaust happened is not,
Yeah.
it did.
Yeah. It's like.
We know it did.
Yeah. And then.
For that matter, I haven't talked to people who have liberated the camps themselves, but I've talked to people who have had family members who liberated camps. So,
Yeah.
that there was something going on is indisputable and something really horrible. uh, going on is indisputable. I think. Uh, you know, that's all. That's one point, but it's just a really weird thing. Like Trent Horn just did this as well. Who's a Catholic apologist. He made a whole video that it would be like sinful to deny the Holocaust, and many people responded to him with like, "What does deny the Holocaust mean to you?" Like you're conflating. I think that there were probably less than the 6 million dead Jews claimed with total denial of the Holocaust, but those are two very different things.
Yep.
Like, so I don't really know what that means. Yeah, Adolf Hitler was definitely not. It's not possible to harmonize his teachings with the philosophy of Christ and Christianity. Uh, there's a biblical difference between the self-loathing of men and grip of disillusionment over a failed idol and the true. I don't know what that means. So we affirm that there is a vital biblical difference between the self-loathing of men, the grip of disillusionment over a failed idol, and the true repentance of the Christian man. Genuinely, I'm trying to work out what that means, and I actually have no idea. Like, what? Who was ever saying that they were the same thing? They're clearly. You're just talking about two different things. It's like saying, we affirm that there is a very clear difference between hot dogs and hamburgers, and being like, yeah, dude, good
Yeah,
job.
I'm
You
not a
notice.
not a hot dog denialist. We
Yeah.
affirm the hot dog.
Like, they're just talking about two completely unrelated things and going, like, there is a vital biblical difference. Like, yeah? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it. I'm missing something.
See,
Uh,
this is why this thing is fairly funny to me, in a sort of like somebody's too smart for their own good again. Uh, because it's like, yeah, sure, these are statements that even have some truth to them. However, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to insert anti-Semitism into, or let's call it philo-Semitism? No, anti-Semitism into like the right-wing discourse. Like Zionism didn't do anything for the election. Nobody paid attention to Leather Apron Club in any matter, in any deep matter. Like he wasn't influential. Uh, it's very clear that the average voter is still, either neutral or positive towards Israel. Um, like what's actually being fought here? The Daily Stormer is completely irrelevant and has been for. I mean, Vox Day kicked the dude's teeth in a debate like 12 years ago. Like it's or something
yeah,
ridiculous like
I
that.
remember that was a pretty funny debate.
Yeah, he crushed him. Like it's not even a question of being snide or whatever. No,
No,
he
he
th- he
humiliated them. I think
humiliated him.
what I recall is that the debate ended with him going like, "I don't understand what your issue is," and Vox responded with like, "I think that is a perfect spot to end the debate." It was pretty funny. I do remember that. So, okay, I found the part that I think is just wrong. Like, so this is where it gets kind of interesting. Uh, We deny that Jews are in any way uniquely malevolent or sinful, or that Judaism, in its multifarious expressions, is objectively more dangerous than other false religions, or that it represents an exceptional threat to Christianity and Christian people. By nature, the Jews are objects of blah blah blah. Yeah, and then so okay, so this part is where it's mixed, but by mixed, that's a problem because it means there are elements of untruth there, which is important when you're signing the
Mm-hmm.
declaration. Jews are not uniquely malevolent or sinful. This is clearly true. Like you don't get and you're not extra likely to be evil by being Jewish is what
Right.
that would mean, which I agree with.
Yeah.
However, where this is wrong, Judaism in its multifarious expressions is objectively we deny that it's objectively more dangerous than other false religions. No, it is. This is incorrect, and it's
Right.
incorrect for the reason historically the first off the church has always recognized the Catholic Church specifically has always recognized the danger posed by Judaism specifically. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the fact that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier that Judaism exists as a religion as essentially the branch off of Temple Judaism that rejected the Messiah,
Yes.
right? Like
They're
that is
the
it.
religion of the Pharisees and the Herodians and all the other people who, basically threw Christ on the cross, sins or otherwise.
Right, because again, like the historical way of understanding Judaism is that it survives in two forms. One is
Yep.
Christianity and one is rabbinical Judaism, right? Like,
Yep.
so there is a very real sense, and it's absolutely true. Like, and I think that this does need to be acknowledged, and because this is where there's the truth that comes in, right? Like, I've heard people try their hardest to deny that Jesus is a Jew because they're just horrified by
Yep.
this fact, right? Which is like just nonsensical. It's completely ludicrous. It makes no sense. Uh, there was even a thing where like Brian Niemeyer had this weird thing in his blog where he's like, Paul's not a Jew, he's a Benjaminite. And then when people were responding, he's like, hey, stop responding if you're making the point of the enemy. And I'm like, no, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't get that point. It doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
Like, you just said you're not a Jew, you're a Jew. And
Yeah.
then you go, no, but what they mean is that, and I'm like, I think that is what they mean. I think if you were to tell them that he was a Benjaminite, they would go, yeah, who are Jews. Like, I don't
Like
get what your point is.
like
So, and
there's
Brian is not enemy coded.
no,
Brian is
no, he's friend coded.
not right.
Yeah.
Like, as you, what was that?
Yeah, he's friend.
Yes, Brian, as we like to put it, Brian is friend coded. I'm not saying that he is part of these groups, but it's similar, unfortunately, I guess, in some ways to people who like try to deny that Jesus is a Jew out of some weird embarrassment over this fact. Uh,
Yeah.
which is like, no, Jesus is obviously Jewish, and that's the thing. Like, I think that there is a proper way. Like, you need to put it correctly, obviously, but
Mhm.
there is a proper way you could say that Christianity is in fact like just the extension of Judaism, right? The Christians in the early centuries would have been considered, at least early on, to be a weird Judaic cult,
Yep.
right? Uh,
And that's how the Romans wrote about him for quite some time.
yes, they did, and they were, in a sense, correct to do so.
Mhm.
Because what Christianity was the continuation of the religion of the Old Testament, as it was changed by the coming of the Messiah, right?
Mhm.
Jews had been waiting for the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah came. He laid down how the religion was going to function from now on, and then it functioned in that way, and that was Christianity,
Yep.
right? Rabbinical Judaism existed because it rejected the Messiah. And then it gets really strange because you have, like, for example, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. Now, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple was preceded by signs. This is recorded by Jews of the time, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's actually kind of wild. I highly recommend anybody who is interested look into this. Like, it was preceded by signs that made it very clear that it was because they rejected the Messiah that the temple was being destroyed. Now, they would, of course, deny this. They would say that's not what it is. In fact, I have actually heard they try to explain it as to because so many people left Judaism for Christianity. And that's why the temple was
Eh,
destroyed, because they left the true religion for Christianity. This is absurd for a couple of reasons. Even if you grant the premise, uh, there were not nearly enough Jews to leave for that to like that doesn't make any sense. Uh, Christianity was simply not widespread enough among Jews for
Mhm.
that to logically follow as a punishment. And then
Yeah.
that's if you even accept the premise that Jesus isn't the true Messiah, which is obviously false as well by a proper reading of Scripture. Uh, but it's really wild. Like, so when they say here that it's not more dangerous than other false religions, like Christians throughout history have always acknowledged that it was, right? Like
Yes.
in every society, popes, local cities, council,
Luther,
whatever, right?
Calvin.
Calvin, like it's pretty much universal among both Protestants and Catholics. The Orthodox don't talk about it much because they just didn't have a lot of Jews. But like the people who had to
Mm,
deal with it, I guess I should
I
say,
don't.
they have
So
always
I'd
been.
say it's more likely that the sources haven't been translated because there were large Jewish populations in Orthodox lands.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe it's better to say that I haven't heard much about it. I
Yeah.
just didn't look into it. Right.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess I'll just say that I can't speak to what the Orthodox have said. But
Mm.
both in the Protestant and Catholic traditions, the danger of Judaism has been historically represented from the beginning, right, and consistently. And the reason that it's an exceptional threat, as they deny it's an exceptional threat to Christianity and Christian peoples. That's not true. There is a reason it's exceptional, and you could logically work it out. You have a group of people who will not integrate into the society, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are specifically remaining separated as part of their religious identity. Now, under the Christian religious identity, one of the things that changed is that anybody could join the church, right?
Yep.
You didn't need to sublimate it to like your national identity. But Judaism, rabbinical Judaism, and for that matter, temple Judaism, right, worked differently. It worked differently in that they were separate from the rest of society. But in particular, they were separate from the rest of society, and the thing that united them was a rejection of the Messiah
Yep.
and a belief that we were following what was essentially a false Judaism, right? Like, if you're looking at it from their perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. If you are a Jew, what you believe in living in a Christian society is that you are surrounded by what the equivalent of Jewish heretics. So you do not. This is like historically the case that Jews generally, for in many different cases, did not feel themselves to be morally beholden to Christians in society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and some of this ended up being hypocritical, and this needs to be admitted, right? Like,
Right.
obviously, the way that Christians treated Jews was not always correct. Um, for example, it is a well-known historical bit of trivia, I guess, that the reason that Jews became moneylenders is because charging on usury was considered immoral, but the Jews would do it. And they wanted the Jews to do it, and then they would still take out loans on usury that the Jews would give out. Um,
Yeah.
so
And then throw them
this
out when
is
it suited them and
right,
not pay back
exactly.
their debts, which is, like, usury is bad, but also taking out a loan with the knowledge I'm probably not paying this back is also immoral. Even the Greeks were very clear that, like,
Yes.
Solon had a year of jubilee for Athens, and he made the mistake of telling his friends about it, what his plans were, and they decided to take out a lot of high loans, and then Solon had all debts wiped away, and they're like, well, you just benefited your friends, and he's like, I just chose bad. Like it was one of those things where like he never actually
Yes.
benefited from it, but his friends were immoral about it. Like it's like there's it's across all cultures. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. So I'm trying to think of how to put I'm trying to explain why they've historically been considered more of a threat. So again, this is something that the main thing for me is simply that the reason I think this is wrong is that it's simply not in step with the larger Christian tradition at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're talking about well over 1,000 years, like 15, 16, 17, 18, 1900 years of people saying that no, Jews are a larger threat for Christianity, and then suddenly we're like, nope, they're not, and
Mm.
that makes me suspicious that that this is probably not right. Uh, and I think and this is so it gets into some speculation, and I think too you could just look at the effects of rabbinical Judaism on the world, and you get to who are the hey, who runs Pornhub again?
Right.
Hey, who runs all of the major news networks? Hey, who is you start and this is where people get into oh, there's a Jewish conspiracy of running the world, right?
No.
Which is not exactly correct, but not exactly entirely wrong either. It's not, I think, that there is a global. So, this is what they say, and I guess I kind of agree. We deny that the world affairs are governed by conspiring Jews, right? or there is a global Jewish conspiracy to corrupt and destroy Western society. I think it's simpler than that. I think that it is that, historically speaking, Jews saw themselves as the in group and Western society as the out group, and as an out group of who essentially believed a heretical form of Judaism. So I think that historically they simply did not see themselves as morally beholden to treat Western society with the as moral equals, I guess is how I would put it, right?
Yes.
And this is why nowadays I think probably they wouldn't even put it that way, but now there's a history of it, and you have very immoral people who are part of this religion who are running a lot of these institutions and things like that, Hollywood and all sorts of stuff. So no, I do think that I think that Judaism is objectively more harmful. You need to be very wary of rabbinical Judaism. Now, once again, this gets into, like, the Feldsteins down the street. Are they in part of a conspiracy to destroy Western civilization? No.
No.
Like, uh, am I saying that you need to treat any one guy, your Jewish friend, Levi, like, are you going to treat him differently? No. Um, that's not how this works, right?
Right.
Now, they say correctly here Jews are in need of the cleansing blood of Jesus Christ, although they add with the Puritans of old, which is really funny to me because, like, why would you mention the Puritans specifically? You're just quoting the Bible. Uh,
The Puritans were right.
I mean, like, they were right, but, like, they were right like every Christian has always been right. Uh,
Yep.
it's just like, why did you mention the Puritans for some reason? I don't get it. But we affirm that in God's good time, multitudes of Jews will come to faith in Christ and be added. So, okay, that's where it gets
Yes.
weird. And be to the true. I don't know what the true Commonwealth of Israel means, but
So that's probably some dispensationalism sneaking in. Um, so Revelation's decently clear that Israel has a part to play in
yes.
the end of time. Um, the 144,000, I believe, are Jews. There's, they clearly come to Christ. Micah talks about this, in the last chapters, that they'll serve Christ in the 1,000-year reign on earth when Satan is chained up. At least that's what I took from a sermon I heard on it. So it's so there's clearly a turning from not Christ to Christ as their Messiah. Uh, so there's something that happens though, where essentially like the Zionism becomes like super happy pro Zionism. Does that make sense? Where it moves from a simple I believe the Jews should have their homeland, and their homeland is Israel, and their homeland of Israel was defined in the Bible. That's reasonable. It has borders that Solomon and David carved out of the world, and were given to them by God. And quite frankly, if I'm reading it correctly, I don't think they ever really conquered all that land and made it just Jews. They owned it through tributary states like Edom, which never really went
Hmm.
away until they were exterminated by Babylon, kind of. Persia, different Persias, not just the Persian Achaemenid dynasty, but like Sassanids and stuff too. Um, so looking at that stuff and saying, okay, well, where are you going with this? The dispensationalists often interfere with or treat as strange witnessing to Jews. They hold them in a sacred sort of state. Um, because it's like, well, they'll be here for the end time, and any time that we blessed Israel, we are also being blessed. That sort of thing, which they'll also deny certain other things the Bible says in the Old Testament from like Psalms and stuff like that, which I have trouble accepting are the same thing. So like an example is certain ways of God talking about how much he hates. David says, "Oh, I hate the enemies of the Lord. They hate you, so I hate them because I love you. This is David talking in a psalm. Uh, I use it for Jack Morrow. Like he hates werewolves, he hates vampires, he hates all the enemies of God. He's still working on the loving God thing, but he's getting there. God bless him. But he hates them, so he kills them. David killed the enemies of God. If that verse is still relevant, like the other verse is relevant, does that give me license then to slay the enemies of God? Not as murder, but in battle and combat, in its proper context. Because even though David killed a lot of non Jews, and Joshua did as well, this was actually prescribed and during warfare. Like it wasn't just, rounding them up and sending them into the desert or something. Um, what was it? All right. So there's like an acceptance of, like I think C.S. Lewis called it Bulverism or something like that. They're only accepting what already promotes their worldview towards Israel and towards certain words about Israel. When if I, like my mother promotes this, not that she's a dispensationalist in this way, but she likes this verse. And if I say, well, what about the verse where David hates on the enemies of God because they hate God? No, we're supposed to love our enemy. Okay, well, there's clearly uh, uh, a contradiction there in how she is treating the verses. Now, I love my mother; she's very good, with scripture. But when Christ says love our enemies, does that include, the enemies of God? Well, yes and no. It means that we are to love them, to witness to them, bring them the gospel, but that doesn't necessarily, looking at the other things and how God talks, like it doesn't mean that we should accept anything that they do that goes against God is valid. You might love an alcoholic, but you don't say that they should drink more alcohol. So I think they're in the same sort of like category error as this thing, where they accept, certain things of prophecy and stuff like that, but they don't understand the context of um, basically making sure that Christian virtue is promoted over non-Christian virtue. I guess I'll say, they need to be saved too, and evil things they might do should not be promoted within Christian circles. For example, anti-genocide laws are very Christian. If you look at videos of Palestine, it's becoming very flat. I understand that Hamas used hospitals as bases and stuff like that. This has been their thing for generations at this point, ever since they were made. But at the same time, like the videos that have come out until I started just blocking everything I saw concerning this was, burn down building, bomb, dead baby. Dead baby, except it's the other side. I don't want to see that. This is all evil to me. I don't want it. But at the same time, if I talk to some people about it, they get hung up on these things where it says, well, God will bless you if you bless Israel. Okay, but they were sending money to Israel while North Carolina was sinking into the mountains, and there's already plenty of reports that if you had a Trump sign outside your house, that you weren't getting any aid. So, how am I supposed to understand that? My people, and the North Carolinians are not technically Missourians, but they're close cousins. A lot of the people in the Appalachian Mountains actually moved and mingled with the Germans who were brought in. Some then moved to Texas. If you ever look up American migration, it's very fascinating. Back to what I'm saying. What am I supposed to put at that? We're supposed to be blessed because we're blessing Israel, but now hundreds of people are dying and their houses are being swept away, and all these horrible things are happening to our countrymen, but we're blessing Israel right now. Something's not right. The logic is broken. And then it's like the weather machine's actually real. therefore it counters the Bible verse talking about this. So it's hard to talk about it because there's subtle line. They are promoting a dispensational view to a certain point based on some verses in the Bible, which may or may not be in the context that they are supposed to be in. At the same time, they want to deny the lies and falsehoods that are causing young men to stray. So it's decently noble, but it's mired in a mindset that promotes against the very thing that they're trying to bring into this fold. Does that work?
Sure. Yeah. Uh,
It's
no,
subtle, it's
I
complicated,
agree.
but it's hard to do it because it's like the verses are real, the verses have meaning, but the actions and the real world events that we're seeing around us contradict some of the things that they want to promote.
Yeah, I would say that the verses have always looked to me like a prophecy for something that would precede the end times. Uh,
Yeah,
so we'll see a mass conversion of Jews before the second coming, probably. But
probably.
yeah, I'm also I don't have much to say about it. Let's see. Is there anything else that was on there? I think there was one other thing. Yeah, it's like, yeah, there's more than one message. We deny there is more than. That's fine. God has ordained the existence of people in nations, but it's important to reject every form of identity politics. So this is one of those things where, like, okay, I think I get what you mean, but once again, you didn't actually explain what this meant.
Yeah.
Um, like, do you mean by identity politics any like talk of I think my people should have a homeland? Because in that case, you would seem to be against the Jews getting a homeland in Israel. Probably what they mean is something more like, I'm gonna vote for this people, so for this politician, because he's going to serve like I don't know the Hispanics or the Italians or whatever. Uh,
Right.
though even that, like this is something that Vox Day talks about, and I think I've come around and kind of agree with him. I'm not so sure that that's inherently bad. I think that that's more so a flaw of democracy, right? And this is one of the reasons that Vox will talk about wanting, like your people should live in your homeland, right?
Yes.
Of course, this gets very difficult when you get into places like, say, uh, people always blame the Westerners for Africa, and they go, "Well, it's because we went in and we divide up the country." Then, meanwhile, when you actually look at like the group of tribes and ethnic groups in Africa, it's a patchwork quilt that is absurdly complex, has much overlap. There is no way to make it so that there's like no conflict, right?
Yep.
Uh, so it gets kind of difficult, and I think you might just be talking about an inherent flaw of democracy here, right?
Yeah.
That you kind of need to accept. I've always maintained the position that democracy, representative or otherwise, is a valid form of government that can work properly organized,
Mm-hmm.
but is by no means the only possible or even or necessarily best form of government. It might be best for a certain group of people in a certain period of time. It might not be, and even if it isn't, that doesn't mean that the government itself is not being run in a valid way. However, I think that a flaw of democracy is that you're always going to vote for your in group, whatever you identify that as. Uh, this is well known. One thing that I know of, like, I have relatives who are teachers who hate the Democrats, right? Like, think they're evil, that whole group, but will vote for them because every single time, because if they don't, then the teachers' unions might be dismantled, right? Like,
Yep.
this is not the same sort of thing, but what they're like, look, this is my retirement. I need this money. Like, if somebody actually does what they say they're going to do, even though I agree with it in principle, in practice, I'm going to be screwed over. You see this a lot with Social Security, right? Like,
Yep.
In fact, this is a huge one, and I've
Welfare
had
in
like
general.
yeah, I've had arguments, but Social Security is a really good one because I've had discussions with people who have admitted to me, who are mostly boomers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Admitted to me straight up that they hate the Democrats. They're very against them. But if someone were to say that they would do everything they wanted but dismantle Social Security, they could not vote for them.
Yep.
And then I would go, well, do you think Social Security is a good idea? Oh, no, I don't. Like, inherently, right? Like,
Right.
I think they probably shouldn't have been made in the first place. But the fact is, it's there now, and I'm depending on it,
Yep.
right?
I mean, my
Uh,
parents are depending on it. I know plenty of old people who are depending on it, and it's like, well, that's sorry, you know.
it goes down even to like illegal immigration. This is why when people talk about, there are people who like hire illegal immigrants to take care of their ailing family members, and then they go like, oh well, Trump's gonna deport all the illegals. What's gonna happen, right? Like, what's gonna
Mm-hmm.
happen to my grandmother? Are we gonna have to move her into a home, just randomly, right? Like, or my great or great aunt Sally, you know,
Yep.
uh, are they getting moved to a home? Like, what? Like, I can't support this. Things like
Yeah.
that, because and that's kind of the democratic trick, right? uh, and that's one of the problem, like, and by democratic I mean the political party Democrat in that
Yeah.
case. But uh, I think this is just an inherent flaw of democracy, that you're always going to vote in favor of your own self-interest, and there's no real way
Mm-hmm.
around that, right?
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, it's like
and
the big shock. The Somali representatives in Minnesota vote things that interest the Somalis. So on and
And
so forth.
there's a real sense where, like, yes, sometimes it's immoral when you're voting for inherently immoral things, right? For example, if you were to say, like, you don't want to get rid of illegal immigrants, I actually don't think that even though it's very, very difficult, right? Because you're dealing with, your own personal issues, to say that you don't want illegal immigrants deported, I think that is immoral, right?
Right.
Like, you should want illegal immigrants, because it's immoral for illegal immigrants to be here taking advantage of the country, right?
Yep.
So even though it would personally inconvenience you, you should be against it. But if you vote, say, in favor, like, you're not going to vote against someone who's going to take away Social Security, even if you think Social Security is a bad idea. That's not inherently bad, right? Like, you're voting in
Right.
your self-interest. Now, you might think it's a dumb policy, but the fact is, you're depending on it, you know
Mm-hmm.
so it's your self-interest. Or if you go like, hey, this guy says he's going, right, he's going to treat the Italians well or something, right? In 1930s New York,
Right.
right? Uh, like, that's
Boardwalk
not
Empire.
inherently bad. Now, it
Yeah.
gets inherently bad if you're voting for someone who is otherwise like a criminal, which is what happened.
Yeah.
You know, but nevertheless, there's no real way. Like, that's human nature. You're not going to get away from this, and this is the downside of democracy. Like, if you didn't have a democratic government, then you could have somebody making decisions who wasn't beholden to the people, who could simply work in accordance with the common good, right?
Right.
So, for example, you could say, I'm going to shut down the welfare state. And then you go, well, what are we going to do about all of these people who are going to end up on the streets? It's like, well, we're going to help everyone we can. But ultimately, there's going to be some people who slip through the cracks. And I
Mm-hmm.
hate that, but it's going to be better in the long run, right?
Yep.
Uh, this is definitely true. But it is very hard that you can find someone who will accept this, because they'll want votes, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's
so,
and it's
yeah,
always
go
easier
ahead.
to and it's always easier to sort of like keep them out than it is to deal with an issue with multiple groups vying for control. Like the big thing isn't that um, uh, how do I want to put it? Like the big thing isn't that there's some sort of weird um, tension between the different classes of people and the different nations and all this other stuff. What's weird is that people kind of expect there to be no tension. Like the Vox Day, we bring him up a lot, but his mind is very much put on this. Uh, diversity plus proximity equals war. People I beefed with have never been there to beef with until I've been near them. It's you know, uh, yeah, it's like it's the weirder thing is that people had a hunky dory attitude, which I want to be clear, this very thing denies that hunky dory ultra utopian thing is evil. Like, I'm sorry, it denies that it's good, right? It denied the utopian liberal experiment. Then it comes down to here and say, actually, you can't be racist about the utopian experiment. Okay, guys, it's not a racial thing. It's not a racial thing at all. Mm-hmm. So you see the internal denial within this piece. Um, like, what are we supposed to do with that? Not be racist, guys. Deny it's an issue that people vote for their own self interests, across all lines. Jewish, Caucasian, sometimes Hispanic, and all that other stuff. Uh, it's not really Caucasian, but like Anglo versus German versus Italian versus Irish. you know, we can't deny truth and then say other parts of truth we can accept, but we cannot deny this part of truth. Truth is a whole circle. It is perfect. It is more than a circle, it's a sphere. All aspects have to be within truth. If there's a flaw within truth, like a lie, for example, one of the lies of liberalism is the tabula rasa, that all humans are kind of blank slate, that they can be trained and taught and all this other thing. Like Rousseau said. Okay, that's one of the fundamental myths of it. It's clearly a flaw. While I would love to have God city on earth and all this other stuff where everyone's kumbaya and worshiping God, which they don't worship God, but don't worry about that. I'm not talking about that yet. The sphere has this deep flaw that fundamentally Anthony and I are the same type of person because we're male, or something like, not even that, that we're people, and there's differences that were inbred to us that are not exactly DNA changes. Well, that's fake. There are significant DNA changes between me and Anthony, even though we're still Caucasian males of a certain age and all this other stuff. Uh, if you pulled out our DNA, you could tell which one was Italian. Anthony. The
Yeah, no, yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You have one flaw. No. Uh, you could tell which one has, like, a mix of Anglo-Germanic and whatever, and whatever's in Anthony. And Anthony, his Italian stuff, sure, there's definitely some Roman there, but there's also a lot of German from the invaders that came down there. And I don't know what part of Italy you were from, uh, but like Sicilians are a whole mix of people because the Arabians invaded and conquered and raped and pillages, the Normans and the Germans and the um, French and different Greek states, Ottomans. Uh, Basically, they like there have been tribes relatively native to Sicily. In other words, we don't know who were before them. Um, but at the same time, they got mixed and intermingled in there. Like, it still doesn't deny that there's a difference between a Sicilian Italian and a Northern Italian. It's the denial of the lies of the liberal world order, or whatever we want to call it, the gay clown world, um, GNC, um, the cathedral, the institute, the whatever funny word people are using, Cthulhu. Uh, uh, like, that doesn't exist. It's never existed. And the people who wrote about it, like Rousseau, didn't know other people and didn't see many other people groups when he made that statement. It was clearly false, because the Anglos had to do two things that really riled up the Indians. the English when they took over India. They said you couldn't burn your widows anymore, and they added an age of consent, and that caused riots. There's got to be fundamental differences between people that are more than just spiritual, but rather that there's some sort of cultural change in how they live, how they interact with each other, that's down to genetics. It's I've been in different places, and I can't imagine how people would talk to them, talk to their mother or something like that. Um, that goes beyond something like personalities. If it's all personality, then nothing can be fixed and nothing can be understood politically except through sociology and psychology. But psychology is actually a very poor science. So what can we do here? Well, we can bring it out into, we know that all the races in America vote in their own self-interest, and that there can't be a blending of them in a way that a liberal world order would want for their total control.
Yeah, I want to end it there. We're at 8:36, and we started on time today.
Amazing. Apparently, it's Solomon Kane month. I love it. Yeah, no, like
Nice.
I'll just make a statement here, ending it. In the end, it ends with, we affirm that in all things, including the treatment of our fellow human beings, the model man and example is not the life teaching of Aristotle. The model man and example is not the life and teaching of Aristotle, nor any other merely historical personage, but the Lord Jesus Christ himself, Son of Man, eternal Son of God. That's a very nice saying, but the thing is that I can't be Jesus. I'm not good enough in this earth to be Jesus, and part of that is a failing. However, as I am imperfect, I will strive to be like Christ in my life. However, Jesus Christ never struggled with things like, what am I going to be when I grow up? He struggled with serving the Lord in personal sacrifice, which is something I can model myself after. But he knew who he was and what he was going to be. Personally, I've got things I'm struggling with, about that subject. What am I going to do here? What am I going to do there? Um, but Jesus didn't have to struggle with that. Well, what can I do to gain that knowledge? Well, I can look to men like Timoleon. He went to Sicily and destroyed the Carthaginian fleets and whatnot in that area, soldiers in that area, and fought over Sicily for many years. Well, I can look to his life and say, if I'm going to, do sort of like a midlife switch, how can I model myself after him? How can I model myself after St. Louis, Louis the Ninth, who lived as a godly man and a man of war and a king of France, and who truly strove to be like Christ. I look to men who are like Christ, not because I want to, or men of history, great men of history, not because of me wanting to create an idol of them to replace Christ in my life with Timoleon or St. Louis or any of these other people. I do it because it is not because if you read Ecclesiastes, God says just work. You know, especially in the 11th chapter, he goes, well, if you keep looking, waiting for perfect, uh, you know, if you keep waiting for it to not rain, you plow in the morning, you plow in the evening, and then you reap the harvest. And if you're not plowing, you're not going to reap. If you keep on looking for this and that, this and that, you're never going to be anywhere. You're never going to get anything, and you're never going to serve him. That's the same way with the parable of the talents. We must serve, and God does not tell us exactly how to serve at all times. Sometimes He does, especially with the saints and other things like that. But it's clear from looking at Joan of Arc's life that she didn't know she was going to be martyred before a certain point. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
she thought she was going to be let out free. And that's Joan of Arc, a woman who had thrown herself into the work of God when it comes to the matter of France and the France as a nation. The same way with men like Alfred of England and other men who sought God, but also lived as kings and as leaders. You know, what are their words for them? Well, I don't know about that. It's in a one previous to this one, it says, we affirm that the ultimate bond for good in life is not grounded in absolute loyalty to blood and soil, family, or nation, but in the totalizing bond of the kingdom of God through the covenant of grace. Yes, absolutely. In the end, part of the reason why I can work with Anthony is that I believe that all Christians can work together. That the salvation of Christ is above, uh, um, my petty politicking and weird theological beliefs against Catholics. However, when I when I study Catholicism and human nature, the Catholic will choose pro-Catholic choices. Not necessarily as a race or anything like that, because that's how their religion and beliefs work. Sorry, Anthony, to sort of like speak third party to you, but
Mm.
Protestants have done the same thing, Lutherans have done the same thing, Orthodox have done the same thing. It's not weird behavior. These choices that they made, which they believed was for the kingdom of God, across all bands, uh, have affected nations, have affected this real world, and many of them believed, most of them, all of them, perhaps, uh, that they were attacking Satan and his minions and his struggles. Whether the Satan is Islam or the Satan is uh, Zoroastrian Persians before Islam, or Catholics or Protestants or Orthodox or pagans, or insert your thing here. The this thing is funny to me because so many times I've seen these things and they fail and they're a whisper and no one ever brings them up again, because they're unimportant, ineffectual, limp-wristed nonsense. It's cringe. It's cuckoldry. It's not biblical. No matter how they try to gussy it up, it's very clear that we live in this world and we have to accept the physical realities of it even as we seek God in all we do with our heart, soul, mind, strength. We love to love the Lord. This thing will be forgotten in like 2 weeks. Maybe he'll bring it up. Maybe Jeff Durbin and all these other guys will bring it up, and it'll, you know, actually have to be something I laugh at again in real life this time if someone brings it up in my men's group, and I will laugh at somebody if they bring it up in men's group. But it's nothing, and there'll be more of these. There'll be so many more of these. I saw a video by Joel Webb on where he was like, "Our fathers were wiser than we are, and we can't let them go down this path. And if we really knew the gospel, I wouldn't have to do this." What a manufactured Matt Walsh wannabe. In the end, serve the Lord and don't worry about it. If you find someone like you like listening to, Christian or otherwise, put what they say according to the gospel. We've already seen some things in the Bible itself that deny some of the stuff that they're saying, especially, yeah, no partiality in judgment, but to the Jew first and then to the Greek. What does that mean? Does that mean that it's nothing? No, it went to the Jew first and then the Greek. Uh, uh, Jesus himself talks about that stuff. If even their starting premises are wrong, how in the world can they be correct about the whole other thing? Thank you guys for listening. Anthony, thank you for indulging me in this. This is my idea, as you guys can probably tell. If you want to do something next week, Anthony, you can bully me in return. How does that sound?
Yay.
Yay. More Catholic
I have
hours.
nothing in particular.
Yeah, it's fine.
Uh, I mean, mostly because the thing that I've been into recently has been Epic the Musical, and we've already talked about it, so.
Yep. I mean, yeah, like the thing is that we're doing stuff in real life And Epic the Musical is just kind of like, 5 minutes that we can listen to a song or watch an animatic, So,
Yeah, I mean, not that I want to turn this into an impromptu epic stream in the last 60 seconds,
yeah.
but I've mentioned it to you that part of it is that Epic the Musical is in many ways the platonic ideal of what I would do if I were like what I would look for.
Yes.
When you hear someone's making an Odyssey musical, my immediate thought is suspicion, especially in the modern day, right?
Mm,
Like, there is no way this is gonna be good. But it is. It's really good.
yep. And
So
it's
I am
something to,
delighted by it.
oh, yeah. And it's something that we can just be delighted by, which I think is pretty important. All right, guys. Next week we'll have something else. There's not a lot of stuff biting out there, not a lot of promotions, um, but we'll see what we can get. Thank you all for joining. Do check out Hightower, check out Pinkerton's Ghosts, and do check out my shorts. I'll have a new batch for you guys next week. Have a good night.
Okay, cool.
Somebody watch
So
this.